Yeah, I'm just rolling it. Feel free.
Okay, right. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, before I even ever went overseas, I had a dialogue that stuck in my mind for years and that I'm still using over 30 years later, sometimes in teaching. I was preparing to go to South India as a young man in my early 20s, and as part of the preparation we were given a chance to meet with a Sri Lankan pastor who was visiting England. And he said this to us. He said, you know, when you get to the Indian subcontinent, you will be astonished and appalled at the way that Christians are taking each other to court. And I thought, yeah, that does sound pretty appalling. It doesn't happen here in England. And then he said, but just remember that as we have come from Sri Lanka to England, we have been appalled at the way that Christians here use their wealth and their resources without any sense of any questioning, discussion, debate about what it means to be, from our point of view, so wealthy. And you know, that really stuck with me because of the way in which we learn so much about ourselves from the experience of a different culture. We just see questions and issues that we've never realized when we stay at home. And of course, subsequently, I travelled to India. I've worked for 12 years in Africa, and I've had all kinds of experiences of my own that have done that. But that initial discussion has always stayed with me as an example for me of the way that cross-cultural Christian exchange is just so valuable for all of us. We all need it, from whatever cultural background we come. That whenever, particularly young people, get a good chance, not you know, to be a tourist or to go for a very short time, but really to immerse themselves in a culture that's completely different from their own. You know, often you think that they're going to give things to that other culture. That was the old missionary tradition, you know, that you went from the West to Africa or Asia and you had all the answers and you dished out the answers to people there. But mercifully, decades ago, we realised how wrong that was. And my experience has been that so often, you know, what you learn from any kind of cross-cultural experience just changes your understanding of your own culture, often in really quite profound ways. You know, I mean, very obvious examples that most people are familiar with are attitudes to time. And attitudes to face-to-face contact, attitudes. One that's currently, I think, culturally quite interesting in our culture is attitudes to the elderly. You know, which in the West we're really wrestling with, as so much a higher proportion of our society is older people, as people are living for longer. And we have so much to learn from African and Asian attitudes to family life and to the wisdom of the wazee, the elders. So that kind of experience, I think, is just so valuable. And even if students can't have the experience, if they can study the history and the ideas and the cultural contexts of Christians in very different parts of the world, again, it helps, I think, to relativize, to see their own problems, their own issues, their own discussions in a different light. And all of that, I think, is enormously important. And we have to recognize that we belong together. I mean, the eschatological perspective, I think, is a good one. You know, if we're going to be up there together one day with the Lord, we need to accept that all of these different elements of what it means to be human are going to be gathered together in one joyful feast. My experience for over 20 years has been with an organisation called the Church Mission Society, CMS, one of the leading Anglican mission agencies. And in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, their leader was a great missiologist and mission leader called Max Warren. And Max Warren is reputed to have said or to have written, and I've spent a long time searching for it and asking others. I've never actually found it, but you'll see it's often, you can Google it, you'll find it's often quoted in two different versions, and I think the difference between the two versions is interesting and worth discussing. He's either said, it takes the whole world to know the whole Christ, or the alternative is, it takes the whole church to know the whole Christ. Now, one can discuss the different implications of those two sayings, but I think this sense that our own perspective of Jesus and of what it means to follow him has to be supplemented with the perspective of my sisters and brothers in Jesus, and of course that's true in the local congregation. But ultimately, I think it's true, across the worldwide church. There's that lovely verse in Corinthians about reflecting the glory of Christ, and it always presents to me a picture of a source of light, a candle, let's say, and not just the individual Christian, but Christians gathered around this source of light, and then we're reflecting. So round the edge of the Christians, you have a circle of mirrors, and so if you imagine that, you would have almost an innumerable collection of reflections and reflections of reflections, and that's the kind of image that it seems to me we need to be working with. So that, I mean, and it will do us so much good to recognise how much we need one another if we are to be the light of the world, if we are to reflect the light of Christ. We can only do it together, and we can only do it by acknowledging the value of the other person's perception and reflection of Jesus, as well as my own.